Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, the world is one family. It's a phrase in Sanskrit language found in Hindu ancient texts like the Upanishad. Now it's also a theme for the G20 summit that India is hosting. But our aggressive neighbor China does not like it one bit. The dictatorial communist regime wants us to do away with this philosophy of Indian civilization that the world in fact needs right now. Here's what Prime Minister Narendra Modi said at the US Congress in June about one earth, one family. Listen in.
We live by the motto of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, or the world is one family.
And this was not unusual. Prime Minister Modi also marked the International Yoga Day, which is observed across the world with the same theme. As per Vedic tradition, this phrase means all living beings on this earth are one family. Let me explain to you. China has opposed the inclusion of this term Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam specifically in the G20 Energy Ministers' outcome document. So then, is India pushing its language agenda to the world? It's not the first time that a country has used their official language. In 2011, France used this tagline, which translates to New World, New Ideas in French. So not surprising also that only China is opposing this. Most participant nations have weighed in favor of India, and some have even stated that the theme is always largely the prerogative of the presidency and the host nation. So what is China's opposition? That the Sanskrit language is not recognized by the United Nations, that it is not one of the 6 official languages mentioned by the UN. But that does not mean that the language is non-existent. Among the languages recognized by the UN are Arabic, Chinese, English, French, Russian and Spanish. Does that mean that hundreds of other languages in a diverse India for one and around the world too have no value? But I have a bigger fact check for you. According to Sanskrit scholar Arkant Chaudhary, former director of the Central Sanskrit University, Sanskrit is in the same language family as English, French and Spanish. They are all part of the Indo-European group of languages. In fact, some of these languages derive heavily from Sanskrit language. According to Mr. Chaudhary, even languages like Arabic contain some words that are derived from Sanskrit language. In fact, the word Mandarin also is believed to come from the Sanskrit word mantrin. Now, the fact is, this is not the first time that China is trying to disrupt the G20 summit in India. China refrained from taking part in the Srinagar Tourism Summit, maybe because it does not want the world to acknowledge the good changes that are taking place in the Kashmir Valley. That's not all. China also engaged in an intense but ultimately abortive backroom attempt to derail the G20 youth conference held in Ladakh in late April. China also skipped an important G20 meeting held in northeastern state of Arunachal Pradesh. Because this country is a bully. That's what China does. Either will encroach and attack our forces on the ground like in Galwan, or will try to intimidate us on Kashmir, Ladakh, and now even on Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. Because bullies are insecure. They do not like someone else's progress. Earlier, China also is believed to have tried using Russia to try and disrupt India's G20 presidency. The problem China has is this. It only wants Mandarin to be promoted around the world, and how dare other nations take pride in their ancient language. Mandarin is made a compulsory subject in schools in Nepal as China pushes in with debt and dominance. China gave an assurance to the Hindu majority nation of Nepal that it will pay for their teachers' salary. But in turn, many private schools will have to include Mandarin as a mandatory subject. How is then our ancient language of Sanskrit spreading to other nations? In Germany, 14 universities and over 1,000 schools teach the Sanskrit language. At least 4 universities teach in the United Kingdom, and the language is thriving in schools in Britain. Dozens of top universities in the United States of America also teach the Sanskrit language. That's not all. Toronto District School Board has become the first major city in Canada to start formal classes in the Sanskrit language in 2019 and is being followed across. In Germany, for example, applications come from across Europe to study Sanskrit. Professor Dr. Axel Michaels, who's the head of classical Indology at the University of Heidelberg, told India Today that students from 34 countries have taken the course at their summer school. And he's added, and I quote him here, that Sanskrit is a live language. It is a rich cultural heritage. Like an ancient scripture or a painting, Sanskrit must be preserved. Apart from this, Indonesia, Thailand, Sri Lanka have ensured that their historical ties to Sanskrit are maintained. All of this inclusion is voluntary. unlike how China is pushing it. India has nowhere made Sanskrit a mandatory subject in other nations. That is the power of our language becoming inclusive in other nations. In India also, Sanskrit is not just printed, but also spoken. According to the last census of 1991 by approximately 50,000 people, Sanskrit permeates Indian culture even more than Latin language did for the European. Dr. Axel has added that even the core thoughts of Buddhism were in the Sanskrit language. To better understand the genesis of Oriental philosophy, history, languages, sciences, and culture, it is essential to read original Sanskrit texts, as these are some of the earliest thoughts and discoveries. For example, one can better understand the evolution of politics and economics by studying the Arthashastra by Chanakya if one can master the Sanskrit language. Panini's Sanskrit grammar is reputed as a computing tool to solve great linguistic problems. These texts date back to 2,500 years at least. Dr. N. Radhakrishnan, the former director of the Gandhi Smriti and Darshan Samiti, believed that the Gandhian vision of holistic development and respect for all, of non-violence also, were an extension of the ancient Indian concept of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. So sure, Sanskrit is not in the 6 languages recognized by the United Nations, but its impact is visible by all. For example, Pitra, the forefathers in Sanskrit, is Pater, father in Latin. Bhrata in Sanskrit is brother in English. Pineapple in Sanskrit language is called the ananasah. Pineapple in French is called ananas. Vastra is clothes in Sanskrit. Vestiaire is to dress in Italian. It's only some of the examples I'm giving you among many of Sanskrit's influence. Our research documents show that Sanskrit words are widely used in the Thai language. For example, kriya, which is an act or a deed, is from Sanskrit, used also in the Thai language. Nimantra, an invitation in Sanskrit, is nimon in Thai. China, in fact, should know better. China also is one of the earliest civilizations, just like India. Unlike many modern Western nations as they stand today, China should have been supportive of India for preserving its heritage and to spread awareness around the world. But it strangely opts to be the exact opposite. Coming back to the G20 theme, India for now has ensured that the English translation is carried into all the documents. Quoting here, "We, the G20 energy ministers, met under India's G20 presidency with the theme of One Earth, One Family, One Future." This was for the meeting in Goa. So they have retained also the Sanskrit words in logo and letterhead. That's a good step, I would say. And look at our position on the global scale right now. India is being seen as a unifier of different nations, even countries that are at war, where India can act as a mediator for peace. Russia, Ukraine, USA, UK have spoken in that context, while China remains that irritable, insecure individual. But remember, a constant critic becomes a solitary objector, and nobody likes that in the long run. Within our nation, India is a diverse country with many languages. The same Sanskrit words that bind us like a thread also binds the world. Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. Thank you for watching. From international to national, take a look now at what's happening in India today by Jessica Goel.
Thank you, Pooja. Now, while all these events have been unfolding along this border, let's turn our attention to the other boundary we share with Pakistan. From key infrastructure developments to, in fact, cross-border love stories, this one border is always in the news. It was 76 years ago in 1947 when one man drew a line that divided these nations forever. What followed changed the course of now two newly independent nations.
At the stroke of the midnight hour, when the world sleeps, India will awake to life and freedom.
These borders are more than just lines on a map, and this one particularly led to one of the largest forced mass migrations in modern history, roughly displacing 15 million people and killing more than 2 million. We all know what followed after the partition lines were drawn. But do you know this line was drawn by a man who was on his first ever trip to India, and he was to finish the task at hand in a month's time. He virtually had no knowledge of the subcontinent, which was why he was chosen as somebody who would make an unbiased decision. This line that divides India and Pakistan is called the Radcliffe line, named after its architect. And it was actually revealed on August 17, 1947, 2 days after the independence of India and Pakistan. The task at hand wasn't easy. Radcliffe was asked to base his lines on the population of Muslims and Hindus in addition to other factors. These additional factors were never officially defined but are believed to include economic and communication resources such as irrigation channels and railway lines. Punjab and Bengal were of complex demographics with neither absolute Muslim or Hindu majority, and that's why these two provinces faced the brunt of the partition. The line he drew is often designated as Bloody Line, and Radcliffe himself is said to have reservations about drawing the line in such a haste.
Day after I drew the line, I left this bloody line. Yes, that's what it is. This bloody line.
30 years after the partition, Sir Cyril died in April 1977 in Britain. It is said that after drawing the Radcliffe line, he left India the very next day and never came back to the country again.
For more informative videos like this, keep watching India Today News Mo.